Welcome everyone to our Spring 2022 series of OTF Connects webinars entitled Supporting Teacher Efficacy and Student Engagement. My name is Peter Beans and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's session with Jodie Williams and Tesa Fiddler entitled Indigenous Education in the Elementary Classroom. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are gathered in the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to actions stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Please allow me to welcome Jodie Williams and Tesa Fiddler. Jodie is the Indigenous Education Coordinator for the Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board. As the co-chair for the First Nations, Métis and Inuit Education Association of Ontario, Jodie provides educational workshops and develops resources to support Indigenous education in schools. She is also the lead on a provincial community of practice for Indigenous knowledge and mathematics. Tisa is Anishinaabe Kwe, a mother of 2 children, and has been an educator for over 20 years. Born and raised in northwestern Ontario, she considers Onigaming and Muskrat Dam First Nations home. Her family also has historical connections to Kitchenamay-Kusib in Inuit territory. She currently lives in Thunder Bay with her family and is the coordinator of Indigenous education with the Thunder Bay Catholic District School Board. Tisa has experience teaching kindergarten through post-secondary and is an executive member of the First Nation, Métis and Inuit Education Association of Ontario. In 2019, Tisa earned the Outstanding Indigenous Educator distinction bestowed by the Canadian Teachers Federation. And with that, let's turn it over to Jodie and Tisa. Welcome.
Miigwech, Peter. Bonjour, Gaknauya. Hello, everyone. Bonjour, Wajia.
I'm so impressed, Peter. That was
I did okay?
That was beautifully pronounced.
Thank you.
Good job.
I had help.
We were chatting about that the other day about pronunciation, and I think it's actually kind of a good segue into. You had mentioned we wanted to make this a little bit informal, and it's kind of the style that both Tisa and I take when we're chatting with fellow educators, because we know that when we have this dialogue in regards to how do we do this work in a good, meaningful way, without appropriating or a lot of the struggles and the fears that come up with a lot of teachers. So we want to make this as a place where we talk about those fears, and we help we help you along in your education journey, in the education spaces that you are in. So maybe with that, we want you to ask questions as we go along. And we also have a Jamboard. So let me just share my screen for a moment here to get started. We have a Jamboard, which I'm going to pop the link into the chat box for you all, because you can use the chat box certainly for your questions as they come along, but sometimes we know people may want to ask an anonymous question. So if you click on that link, you'll see here the Jamboard, where you can also pose a question, and we'll monitor the Jamboard as well for questions that you might have. So we just wanted to give a variety of ways to ask your questions. Do you want to talk about this, Tisa?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I just lost my Zoom screen just now.
Oh.
Yeah, I opened up the Jamboard and it slid over on me, so I just got to figure that out. I've I say as an educator in my role that my job is to answer questions. Educators like myself, in my own teacher training, in my own public and First Nations education, I didn't learn any of, the content really that we're expected to be teaching. And, it's only been within, the last decade or so that I've authentically been able to make connections between what my lived and known experience is as Anishinaabe and Western, education systems, and seeing, the correlation between and the impact that, historical government, current government, education, all of the systems have had on Indigenous peoples. And so, my gig is to make sure that I support teachers, and ultimately at the core of it is to ensure that Indigenous students and families are safe in our education systems. So with me, there is no such thing as a stupid question. But that being said, it's important just to put it out there that, it's not every Indigenous person's responsibility to answer the questions that we have either. So this is the time to pose those questions.
Sorry, I just had to change something on my screen here. Just give me 1 second, and then I'll put back my screen share here. So we're going to just talk a little bit about the organization. The FNMI EAO, people often comment on our long acronym. So this organization, as like many subject associations, are run by a group of volunteers, and the mandate is to promote and encourage good quality content in classrooms across Ontario. So being a teacher association, our priorities are to help support teachers in that process. And so we've been creating resources and providing workshops just like this, and having all kinds of conversations, different conversations. And although we started out with a focus on what was originally known as the Native Studies curriculum for high school, which has now been renamed, and there's a new curriculum, and it's now First Nation Métis Inuit Studies. We've morphed in kind of more of a K-12 and even into post-secondary since the TRC and the new changes to the social studies curriculum, and now that's expanding out. So it's going to be hitting everywhere eventually. And so we've been working really hard at developing resources to help make sure that the quality of content is, free from stereotypes, that it's free from harmful narratives, and we try and, when we talk about truths, we want to really balance that out as well with examples of brilliance, achievements, contributions, things like that. So we are guided by an Elders Advisory Council in our organization as well. And so what we do and what we put out, it's a slow process, but it is vetted through this council as well, to make sure that, when you come to our site, it's quality vetted resources, because it's very dangerous what's online. Be very, very careful what you Google, because there's all kinds of weird, bizarre interpretations out there in terms of what people think or who Indigenous peoples are, or very weird, bizarre interpretations of culture. And so we want to make sure that you're going to places that have, vetted resources. So today, we are here to showcase some of our elementary resources. So we're going to go over to our website here.
And I've popped the link in the chat if anybody would like to follow along.
Thank you. And you'll notice here, we do have a members only section. Most school boards, a large majority of school boards actually have a license. So if you're not sure if your school board has a license, you can email, maybe you can put this in the chat box too. You can email info@fnmieao.com. And you can just say, hi, I'm just inquiring if my school board, whoever your board is, has a license. If not, it's $50 for a year. And those memberships really actually help us continue the good work. So it's, like a reciprocity. We don't get any funding. We are a not-for-profit grassroots organization. Like I said, people like Tisa and myself dedicate and volunteer our time to doing all of this work to make this viable and happening. So that's a little bit about that. So today we're going to dive into the public resources section, and the resources that we're going to focus on. There is a version of them called we really should call these something else, Tisa. It was in response to the changes of the TRC curriculum, and then they kind of got nicknamed TRC resources, but they're more than that. But anyway, so they're there. But we're going to go to the public-facing site just in case there's folks here who don't have a membership, because there's lots of things on the public-facing side as well. So before we get in to this particular section, I'm going to turn it over to Tisa to kind of give some background about these communities, because two of them are the communities that was mentioned in Peter's excellent pronunciation of them, and just to kind of give some background in terms of how this came about, and then we'll dive into some of the examples of the lessons in here.
Thanks, Jodie. So I'm really very privileged to come from two different areas of northwestern Ontario. My father was from Treaty 3. My family is still there, from Onigaming First Nation, and it's right on Lake of the Woods. And my mother is from originally from Kitchener-Megazib in Inuit, or Big Trout Lake. It's the English name. When I was part of the curriculum revision for social studies, the first version, or the first phase, sorry. And when the curriculum was revised, recognizing that, the ministry recognized that, resources are needed in order to support the revisions. And I like to consider them enhancements. It was really about ensuring in those grades that Indigenous peoples were appropriately represented. And so funding was provided, an opportunity to apply for funding was provided to organizations to create resources. So the FNMI EAO, and I apologize for using it as an acronym, but we took the opportunity to submit a grant. Jodie is a grant writing queen. And actually, I wonder if it might have been Jodie said, hey, I have a great idea, Tisa. And I think that's probably how it went. And it was a really great idea. And she said, we have an opportunity to really explore Indigenous peoples, or First Nations peoples, and their knowledge systems all throughout Ontario. And I was at that time the only person that was from the north. I live in Thunder Bay. I'm zooming in here from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Gavanimki, Waju, in Thunder Bay, what is now known as Thunder Bay. And so I said, well, I'm technically right now I'm in Thunder Bay, which is not really the north. If we look geographically, we are Midwest Ontario. I said, but okay, we can do this. And it was such a beautiful opportunity to reach out and connect with community. I was able to travel with some of the crew that created the videos. They're fabulous videos. They're professionally done. We got sufficient funding to create these videos, and traveled to Kitchener-Magazib in late June. Oh, what year? 2019, perhaps, before COVID.
So we've had a request, some of the Indigenous words. Could you pronounce them slowly so people can learn how to pronounce them correctly? Or maybe just repeat them a second time.
Okay. Kitchener-Magazib, Inuit. Or Big Trout Lake is the English word. So we were able to go there and visit with leadership, with the school, with knowledge keepers and elders. And the focus of this project was on grade 4, and looking at early civilizations. The videos can be used for any grade. But what we did was we took the sample questions right out of the grade 4 curriculum, the revised curriculum, and made sure that we answered those sample questions. We know that those questions are super helpful for educators when they're venturing into the curriculum. And it was just a wonderful opportunity. And it wasn't that we just went there and took from the community. We gave all of this back to the community as well, and explained what the purpose was, and the same for Onigaming. We've gone back to Onigaming a number of times, and that's Onigaming. And in Onigaming, my aunt and uncle were and some good friends and knowledge keepers are key parts of the videos that we've produced as well. And so in the north, in the far north of Ontario, there is a lot of land-based knowledge. A lot of the traditional knowledge is still very much part of their lives. When we think about early civilizations, for example, in grade 4, we think of it having happened hundreds upon hundreds of years ago. Whereas one of the elders that, in many of the videos that we have, he was born in a teepee, on the lake, and in Kitchener-Magazib. And, we think of that as being, wow, born in like a wigwam, so long ago. That doesn't happen in today's modern age. And then he became an expert lodge builder, a shelter builder. And he talked about the science of building lodges, using different layers of natural product and different types of moss to create insulation or a natural coolant effect. And he was an expert, a snowshoe maker as well. So, all of these technologies and innovations that we acknowledge as being historical knowledge or part of early civilizations are still very much part of the lives of the people that I come from in the communities now. And so the land-based knowledge is very rich. And we went to Onigaming, where absolutely there is land-based knowledge. But in Onigaming, we had the opportunity to talk about the worldview piece when in relation to ceremony, with spirituality, and we do this very carefully, and we'll talk more about it when we are done towards the end of our presentation. But it is about going into it is about learning, understanding that there was there was very complex, sophisticated worldviews and governance models and spirituality, family systems. So it is really making something taking something that is very sacred, and there were parts of that experience where the community asked us to be part of it. It was really quite an honor. Onigaming First Nation, any of the communities around Lake of the Woods, they've been able to preserve their ceremonies. They have some of the old Anishinaabemowin, the ceremonies in the traditional older language that hasn't been as impacted by colonization. During the enforcement of the Indian Act and the outlawing of ceremonies, my great grandfather, other people, other knowledge keepers from around the lake, they were able to go and hide all their ceremonial items out on the island. There's many islands. It's a really big lake that goes through Manitoba, Ontario, and into Minnesota. They were able to go out and gather, in secret, and were able to preserve that knowledge and those customs. So when we were able to start practicing in the open again, we didn't have to go searching for that ceremony. And it was just so grateful to my ancestors for taking that risk, for being so courageous and just believing so deeply in the ceremony, and for their willingness to, my family now, for their willingness to share that knowledge with educators and children in classrooms, so that we can really move forward in this journey of what is truth and reconciliation.
So I've put up here just so people know visually when we're talking about these two communities in particular, where they are. And people always forget, I think, how big Ontario is. So hopefully you kind of get a sense of where the two communities. The other community that's on here is oh my gosh, what Moose Cree? Holy.
With Chapleau.
Wow, I was like really blanking out there for a minute. Chapleau Cree. Trust me, I know these things. I've been working on this for a long time. That was a total blank. So I'm just going to pull up where Chapleau is, so that you can also get a sense. And like, this is a good thing too, to do with students as well. Like, look and see where people are, and get them. We really, in this resource, we really lean on the inquiry process of asking questions and building on, students' wonders, what they're wondering about, and really going on that learning journey with students. One of the things that often gets asked is like, how do I teach something I know nothing about? Well, sometimes we have to do that when we're doing math. At least I do anyway. But that's okay. We're not supposed to know absolutely everything. And so this is why we really encourage that co-learning journey stance as educators with students. And it's also good pedagogy anyway, because it takes away some fear and anxiety of students, us being that role model in being brave to go down and, go into an area that you're not too sure about and be okay with that learning process. It actually invites students to take risks in their own journey as well. And it really builds on that sense of wonderment that kids have. So that's just to give you a little sense of where the communities are. There is one other community that was part of this project, which was Oneida. Oneida is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, completely different from the Anishinaabe. And so these ones actually, for the person who put the thing about the sound file, we actually did sound files for all the Oneida ones, and it just never dawned on me. We should probably have at least put it in for the community names as well. So we will work on that, adding that in. But these sound files, we didn't do videos. It's in the teacher guide, which we're going to dive into the content in there, and then it points to those sound files as well. So the idea again is to bring in a variety of perspectives and narratives and truths and story, and from communities up in the north, because like Tisa was saying, this is an area that is often missed out on. And maybe what we'll do before we dive into the teacher guide is I'll just show you on, we'll play you a couple of videos so that you can get a sense of how beautiful they are. And then also what you'll see here is we have a student guide, and we also have one in French. So that was another big thing. I know for the, my heart always goes out to French teachers, because it's an area that really needs a lot of help with resources. We are actually, on that note, in the process of, on our secondary resources, we've just put out some newer lesson plans, and those are actually being translated in French. So we will have a few more French resources coming soon. But anyway, what we did when we switched over when COVID came about and everybody was switching dramatically over to the online world, which here we are very accustomed to, we took pieces from the student guide, and we created these downloadable worksheets. So for example, I'll just click on this one so you can see. And the idea is so that you could put it into your online classroom, and then students could type right into the documents. So you could put it into your Google Classroom and set it up in that way. So you could download them and then upload them into your classroom, and students can type, and save that, share it back to you as a teacher. The only thing that's not on the front facing site is the answer key. However, I'll just tell you this, it's not rocket science, the answers. So if you're not, in the paid membership side, it's okay. You will know the answers yourself. So anyway, so that's kind of to give you a sense of what these are to click on. And then if you click on here, this will download the actual full guide in itself. And you'll see in the guide, we've put it into these kind of, we grouped it into these sections of where we come from, roles and responsibilities, language, so these are all under who we are, identity and language. And then Unit 2, how we live and community values. Unit 3, how we lead, leadership, governance, and decision-making. Unit 4, connections to the land, and so on. And then it gets into just some, information about the TRC and our key understandings. And so these key understandings this is kind of like your really big ideas, is that and this is what we want kids to, and adults really, to walk away from, is really having that solid understanding around Indigenous civilizations have always been here. And so, especially in elementary, a little thing that sometimes happens is that we often teach about people in the past. And so to be mindful of that have always been here and are still here, that the civilizations are sophisticated and complex. So that's another stereotype that we're trying to address is, not making sure that how you're going to bring content forward in your class, it's not simplistic. It's not, feeding into that, what we kind of, call leathers and feathers, or, that Indigenous peoples are just like, frolicking around, very simply living, like that we're talking about complex, sophisticated civilizations. that everything is grounded in relationships and connections to the land, and that the civilizations are diverse and very different. And so this is, again, a snapshot of just a few communities. And so it's really important when you're teaching in the classroom that that's being brought forward, that when you are learning about, in this case, this particular community, that's what you're referencing. It's not the same for everybody else. There might be similarities and you could talk about those, but that to really make sure that you're explaining that to students, that not every community is the same. So let's do, I think geography was one of the favorites in this. We'll just show a little sneak peek of this video. And when you're watching this video, think about, if you're showing this in your classroom, and again, we've tied specific curriculum expectations to 4 and actually grade 5, I think. But this can apply beyond that. You could even use this into secondary, because it's the content that you're bringing forward. And so think about what would be those questions that you would be asking students as they're watching this, and what are they wondering about? Can you hear the volume okay?
We can.
Great.
We're called Kichinamexip Inuit, which translates from the Ojibwe Cree language, which is our native tongue. It means the people of Big Trout Lake. So we're situated in the middle of the boreal forest, about 600 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, and just within the Hudson Bay lowlands.
There's about 28 rivers that flow into Big Trout. And every river that flows into Big Trout gives life to this lake.
The reason why people, stayed in this area was plentiful. Like fish was plentiful that time, still is. Plus the hunting was pretty good here because every season there's a different kind of animals that come by.
We have pristine lands, pristine waters, and we can drink out of the lake still.
We have to keep our lake not just for us, but for everybody. Because water is sacred to us.
If you look at the world today, we have 1% of fresh drinking water of the whole globe, and we live on it.
So all these rivers that flow, we have to find ways to protect them and should keep it. Can't destroy it.
We were taught by our elders to protect our land and our water from pollution and just to keep it safe.
I feel it's important that we preserve and protect it for future generations, the same way that our grandfathers and grandmothers and our ancestors have passed on, the lands and waters to us.
I'm proud to be from Kichinamexip Inuit, because if I get bored, I can just walk into the woods, roam until I have to come home.
I'm proud to be from here because of the landscape. Like, we're allowed to hunt, we're allowed to camp, we can build in places in the bush where we can have a cabin. And you look outside at night, you can see the northern lights just dancing in the sky. There's usually blue, green, depending on where you are and how it is.
Everybody likes the lake when they come up here. It's the lake here. When I go to communities, kind of small, the lakes, when I come back, I can breathe from the lake.
It's a beautiful place to be.
So I just want to put it back out to the group here. When you see this, what comes to mind in how you might be able to utilize this in your classrooms? You just want to pop in the chat or unmute yourself. How could you see yourself using a video like this in your classroom?
I'll add, Jodie. Yes, it is Earth Day tomorrow. Or maybe I'll give some background on the people who were interviewed in that video. It's such a beautiful story. Powerful, courageous people. Looking at the chat, land acknowledgement, stewardship to the earth, connections to land. With that video, it really could directly link back to treaty relationship. The people who were interviewed in that video are people who they went to jail for protecting that land. They were the only chief and council who have ever been sentenced to a jail term for refusing to allow a mining company into their community. So you can Google more information on it. The KI6, they are called. So it's an incredible story that we don't talk enough about. That they were protecting their treaty rights, and Daryl Sinowap, everybody in that video, they were so emotional when they were talking about the beauty of the land, because they did go to jail for it, and it is something that we need to talk about. They wanted consultation, and the government gave way to the mining company to come in and lay stake. And so the community, they did peacefully what they needed to do. They took boats on the water when the float planes tried to land. At the airport, they got, the chief and council didn't do it. It was the community. All the grandmothers got together and they created a human chain and refused the mining company onto their land there. Told them to get back on the plane and leave. In the winter, on the winter road, they bulldozed the big snow dike down the road that they were using to access their lands. And they said, the government said, you have to disclose where all the traditional trap lines are, where the burial grounds are. And the community said, all of it is our traditional land, all of it. And the government said, well, you're in contempt, you broke the law, and you need to go to jail. And what is so incredible about, the trial was, one of the defense lawyers, and I was in the courtroom for this, that one of the defense lawyers asked, the chief, Donnie Morris, he was the chief at the time as well, and said, when you talk about treaty relationship and the understandings of treaty, what is your understanding? Can you explain it to us? And Chief Morris went on, spoke for about 5 minutes in his Oji Cree language to the lawyer and to the court and the judge. And when he was done, he said, and that is my understanding of the treaty. And then they all went to jail. There was a grandmother as well. So, when we think about high school law, civics, there are just so many ways that this resource can be utilized.
I love the comments that are coming in.
They're great.
Yeah. So you can see, right? Like, we have the teacher guide there. We have lots of guiding questions, and we kind of framed it like we wanted, to give people a starting point, because sometimes people don't know where to even begin. So, you could use this as, just follow it as it's prescribed. But hopefully, what we hope to see is that as you become familiar with utilizing content in the classroom, that you start to see where all of these connections are made. I see, where are the videos? Okay, so on the website, when you go to public resources, under elementary resources is where I am right now.
Jodie, could you pop the link to that one specific video in the chat, please? And then I'll make sure that all these comments go with the link to that video for the show notes.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Peter, you're getting really techie here. All right, hopefully.
You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing.
I think I've never linked the actual video, so hopefully that works.
Well done.
Did it work? Okay.
Yep. Hey, you told me you could do all this stuff, so.
Yeah, but I've never done what you just said. That sounded intense. When you said notes and things. Okay. But yeah, so that's another example of, you can embed these videos into your Google Classrooms or whatever format you're using and download those worksheets. Let's go over to, because it's Earth Day tomorrow.
So I can just add to about the videos. We wanted to make sure that they were accessible for all grades, right? And we broke them up into shorter video clips. I think maybe the longest one is 9 minutes. I think the average video is around 5 to 6. That's the average length of the video, 5 to 6 minutes. Because we wanted to make sure that, we weren't losing the message, in the length of the video.
So
and you will notice, and Jodie didn't mention this, that we do have the videos in French, but they're in French subtitles. Oh, that's a beautiful one. Yeah.
It's so important that we teach about the water and our connection, because that's what we were in. And for the women, we are keepers of the water. And the reason why we are keepers of the water is because we are able to carry life in our bodies, and that life is surrounded by that sacred nibe. And because we have that ability to do that, we are medicine. We are very powerful medicine and sacred. And so that's why we are keepers of the water, because of that first water that all babies are surrounded and all that new life is surrounded in. For Onigaming, Onigaming means portage, and we're between two beautiful lakes. One is a natural spring-fed lake, and that's where we get our drinking water from. And the other lake is Lake of the Woods, which is a really big body of water that covers a large area. And that used to be our main means of transportation, Lake of the Woods, and our connection to all the other communities out there. That's our whole life. That's where we're lake people.
And the 4 types of water is the ones that falls from the sky, that salt water, that fresh water. And then the 4th one is the one that women are given, the one that we as women, when we conceive life and how we grow life in that water.
So the women here, as far as I can remember, we've always honored the water. And they make these special, springtime, they make these special little rafts, and they have ceremony, and they gather, and they ensure that they do this because of to protect the community, to protect families, to keep them together, and also to protect the children. And because the water is the one that gives us life, and so we honor the water. So going out to the lake, especially during the winter time, came through a dream.
So again, hopefully you're seeing like, you can have conversations in your classroom around and asking your students like, so, now that we've watched this video, what did Sandra talk about that was important about the water for her community? And so it's having these conversations in the class is how you can introduce, people like Sandra or other community members and what it is that they're sharing about their lived experience. And then, where can you look for connections back? So bringing it back to students' own experience as well. Where do you, does your family consider water important to them? Or why might the plants feel that water is important to them? Or, there's lots of ways to look for those connections and make that personal learning back into the students as well. There's a big section in that resource as well in terms of roles and responsibilities. So you can go into, lots of discussion. I think I saw it somewhere in here around, oh yeah, look at that. Tisa, you read my mind. I saw water walking or the water walkers, right? And so there's that beautiful book as well, The Water Walker, that you could tie that in and further the conversation there as well. And there's like amazing resources like the one that Tisa just popped in the chat box. So lots of opportunity for intersections with other resources as well.
Jodie, I'll just explain a little bit about Junior Water Walkers. This was an initiative that was started by Peter Cameron. He was just so inspired by Josephine Ba, water walker, an elder and such a respected person, and worked in collaboration with her, with other water walkers locally here in Thunder Bay, and with myself to ensure that he was moving forward in a good way, because he felt that the concept of being a steward to the water was so critical to the survival of our earth. And it's very true. He just wanted to make sure as a white settler that he was doing it in a good way, that he wasn't appropriating. And the videos where we share, it was the community that asked if they could share their understanding of relationship with water through ceremony with us, with educators like yourself. Not that it gives anybody permission to go out and do the ceremony, but for teachers to emphasize the fact that water is so sacred that we pray to it. It is life giver. And that is our understanding of water as original stewards. And so, Peter continues to do this work. There are junior water walking classes all around the world. It was a learning experience for us, and it really is about recognizing water as a living entity. It is alive and it gives life. And there's tons of resources and linkages there. So this is one example of extending that learning as settler educators. Safe, respectful allyship.
And even into Treaty Week, I know, because Tisa, you mentioned it before, and having, when you watch videos like this, it really strengthens and builds the understanding of how important that connection is for land and water. And so when we talk about, these opposing pieces when it comes to the treaty, like why, like it doesn't make sense that the Anishinaabe, for example, would just give away their lands and waters and just like walk away and say, oh yeah, have at her, just destroy the whole place. Like it doesn't make sense. And so, to like, when it comes time to talk about these treaties and to understand like what were these, we're talking about for children as well, what were these promises? When people were coming into these lands, the promises were to you can live here. We share the land. We'll all live here together. But then we also agree to take care of the lands and waters. And so our agreements have been broken, and we are all suffering through abrupt climate change right now. And so when we talk about climate change, there's all kinds of connections we can bring back in terms of our roles and responsibilities. You know, sometimes we hear from teachers, well, why should this matter to me? I'm not Indigenous. Well, one, you live on Indigenous lands, and two, everyone needs clean water. So, and we are in a real critical, situation right now in regards to the lands and waters and climate change. So also, intersections to talk about that as well through here. Back over to, I wanted to mention as well, so there is a little video here on instructions on how you can bring this into your classroom. So it's just a little instructional guide as well. And I thought there was another, am I thinking of, you know what? I think it's under, no. Hang on a second. Okay. So we just showed you elementary resources. Now you'll notice if you click on public resources in here, there's a generic site or covering just education as a whole. There's also this video here is most of our elders council and other community members, we put this compilation together it's basically what it says, a message to teachers, what they want to see being taught in schools and things that they don't want to see. Like what we don't want to see is mimicking or replicating things that without permission, we want to avoid doing that, but we want to bring in the voices. That's why we created these videos in order to help people bring voices into the classroom and make those connections. We want to be teaching about, truths. We want to be teaching about facts like geography. We covered a lot of geography there through that. So there's some pieces of here for you as well as educators in here. We don't have time to get into it, but what I wanted to also focus on is we have this piece here that also when we talked about contributions, so oftentimes, teachers will say, I don't know what to teach. Contributions is a great way to get started and dive in. And when we talk about, representation matters, right? Like kids seeing themselves reflected, not just in the past, but also in the present. And so this is another little resource. I'll just show you a little bit. Hang on, let me go here so I can show you what's in here. So we have all kinds of contributions, such as authors. There's a slide deck you can go through, and it highlights different authors, journalists, and again, like it highlights different journalists, artists. You can click on people to learn more about them, athletes, chefs, teen influencers, land defenders and water protectors, especially because of Earth Day tomorrow, veterans. A lot of people don't know that there's actually Indigenous Veterans Day just before Veterans Day, innovations and inventions. So all kinds of things that you can explore as well, that's found there. So that's under, if you click on public resources, it's in there, versus if you click on elementary resources, that's got the other videos as well. And then we don't really have time, but I'll just point to it anyway. There's a little piece here that is, it's in here, but it's not 100% done. We have a teacher curriculum link to it, but the science curriculum just got redone. And so anyway, we held off on making all the curriculum connections, but this is another little one. Again, when you're looking at, the land as our teacher, and again, like different people talking about the significance of Indigenous knowledge systems. And then there's a video that we did on this with Isaac Murdoch, and he's making fish pemmican. And so there's all kinds of things, I'm sure you can imagine it, because we don't have time to watch the video, but the process, it goes through the whole process of catching the fish, to smoking the fish, to eating the delicious fish at the end. And so through that whole process, there's tons of like STEM and all kinds of stuff in there. So I wanted to also mention, because of, you just saw in those elementary resources, some folks from our Elders Council, we have an upcoming event, if you don't know about it, which is tomorrow. And tomorrow we will be spending the day listening to some incredible people from our Elders Council. So if you'd like to join us, go to upcoming events. You can just register and you'll get the link to join. In here, so these are the different speakers and when they're going to be coming on and speaking. Some people have asked, what are they going to talk about? Well, if you ever get a chance to sit with an elder, sometimes you just don't know, and you just have to show up and be ready to just take in the good knowledge that's going to be shared. So they're just in half an hour little bits, with the exception of the Onigaming folks. So you'll notice Sandra Indian there that you saw her in the video. Douglas Sinclair is also in those videos. And so anyway, so that's tomorrow. We have we're going to start it off with the lighting of the kuluk with Monica. And so I just wanted to mention that. And we have a few minutes left, I think, if there's questions.
There's a question on the Jamboard.
Oh, okay.
What do you see as appropriate activities other than discussions students could do related to these videos that is not considered cultural appropriation? Jodie, do you want to pull up that last slide?
Right? So basically, so you want to make sure what it is that you're doing, like the big ones, right? Like, don't be mimicking, replicating, or reproducing. So don't be doing that. We want to, it doesn't have to be this video. It could be a text. It could be whatever it is, the content that you're bringing in. Every school board has an Indigenous Education Advisory Council. I can't speak for every school board, but most school boards have, a process to ensure that the resources are appropriate that are going out. And you know what? We always tell people, if you're not sure, just ask. Contact your Indigenous education lead and just check in. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Just a question. I get them all the time. It's easy. Sometimes it's like, wow, you know what? That's a great idea. Can I actually, share that? And then sometimes it's an idea that needs some tweaking. So just ask. It's not, that's the best way. And then you want to just be considering the content, that it's not, romanticizing or, another term is pan-Indianism, where, you're teaching broadly and then you're applying it to everyone. You want to make sure you're avoiding that.
And who is it that you ask? Who do you get permission from?
So you would go to your Indigenous education lead in your school board.
Okay.
Yeah, because they would be the ones also that are working with your local communities, First Nation communities, and oftentimes they're the ones who are going to have those relationships. For my board, for example, like we have a visiting program so that we bring in, recognized community members. It's virtual right now still. That would come into classrooms and talk about whatever, depending on the curriculum or the grade or the topics, to share that.
Yeah.
So everybody's a little bit different too.
So
in terms
if
of-
an art teacher, for instance, wanted to make Indigenous jewelry in class, they would just
That's a
go
great one.
to your lead.
Mhm.
That's it. Yeah. So we don't want to be, and again, you want to, with the art piece, right? It's not, you don't want to be mimicking.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. The popular one is paint like Morrisseau. Did anybody stop and ask if that would be okay? It's a common thing that happens, but we don't even think, right? We're not even, so we have to start to even think about maybe some things that have been happening for years and years and years in education. Just because it's always been a thing doesn't necessarily mean it's been okay. So we want to make sure that, and again, like for students, rather than just paint like mimic an artist, take the time to learn about the artist. Why is he choosing to paint in this way? What are the messages he's trying to convey? Getting to those ideas and messaging, and then have students in their own artistic manner. So let's say the artist is trying to convey connection to the land. We talk lots about that. How might you, if you want to use paint as your medium, perhaps you want to give them student choice on what artistic medium do you want to use to convey your connection to land. Do you see the difference? So that you're not taking away from students exercising an art form per se, but you're not also just simply copying and just paint like so-and-so, right? Yeah. So there's a difference. That's kind of the difference in that.
We had a great question. Why is it offensive to use the terminology Canadian?
Before we get to that, Tisa, did you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to, give another example.
Yeah.
So it was a couple of years ago, I was in a grade 5-6 classroom, and, I did sort of a grade 4 recap of what early civilization is. And then we got into the treaty relationship and settler contact and the influence of settlers on Indigenous people for their, heritage and identity unit, our strand in the social studies. And when I was done co-teaching for a couple of weeks, the teacher extended it because it had engaged the students so much, learning about kind of the impact that colonization has had and continues to have, that they started talking about water within their science unit. But then the students, extended that learning to not just learning about water as a substance, but the issue of lack of clean drinking water in First Nations community, which then extended into language arts. And the kids it was multimedia. And so they created, it really activated kids, and there's, civic-minded kind of responsibilities that how unfair it was. I love grade 6 because they're like social justice crusaders. But it was not right that there are still so many communities without clean drinking water. And so they created poetry, different posters and infographics, letters to the Prime Minister. They contacted our local MP. The local MP came to visit the school. They presented that to the MP, and not saying that will, be possible for every school, but and then those letters were delivered to the Prime Minister. That was activism. We want kids to recognize that treaty rights, inherent rights, those responsibilities, those agreements have been broken. Our rights have been taken away, and that we have a lot of work to do to make it better, right? And what is the responsibility that we have as educators, as citizens in community to make sure we bring awearness. Sorry, that was kind of my example. It is cross-curricular, and it is beyond arts. We can tie it into multiple subjects. So, sorry, Peter, the question that was.
Actually, I think Jodie put it into her slide. If you want to talk to her.
I actually realized that there was a correction that needed to be made. So when I saw that question about why is it offensive to use the terminology Canadian, and then I realized, oops. But I will speak to. There's a piece on Canadian, but I think what it was meant to do is the possessive language, like be careful about possessive language. You'll see it in the media all the time, right? Like Canada does not own people, but they'll speak in that way. So just be aware of the possessive language, but also in regards to Canadian, many people do not consider themselves Canadian. And if you think about it, we're just talking about the Anishinaabeg as a big example, as a nation. So if you are Anishinaabeg, you're not Canadian. And this is the big, unless you choose to be, it's a choice, right? So this is the big thing that we're talking about, especially with treaties. We have nation to nation legal agreements, nation to nation. Well, how then can it just be Canada? So this is the thing about maps. Like, we talk about the propaganda, right? Like kids are only seeing one nation. They only see Canada on a map. Where's the Anishinaabe Nation? Where are the other nations? Where's the Haudenosaunee Confederacy? Where's the Mushkegowuk? Where's the Inuit? Where's the, we keep erasing nations even to this present day. So we want to be mindful about that. We want to be, when possible, using terminology by the nation when, if you can and when possible. If you're not sure, you, again, just simply ask. It is completely okay for me to say, hey, Tisa, I heard in your introduction, you mentioned where you're from. What's your nation again? Can you just let me know who you are? That's totally okay to say that and ask people that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, people are very proud to say where they're from and who they are. Does that help clear that up?
Then we had a follow-up. Would it be appropriate to say Indigenous peoples of Canada? Of Canada.
I say when I talk, with all those words in one sentence, I say Indigenous peoples in what is now Canada.
Ah.
You could also say Indigenous peoples within their respective territories.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other ways to
Indigenous peoples in what is now known as Canada.
Yeah.
It gives people, food for thought.
There's a question about Iroquois. So Iroquois, for many people, again, is because of historically where the terminology came from. So again, it would be better to use Ongwahongwe, because that actually means, is in the same way as Anishinaabe, really it means like original peoples. Iroquois is a term that came from settlers as well. So again, it's like Aboriginal. These are all terms that have been placed on other people, not from those nations. So we're trying to do a lot of, and it's going to take time. Like textbooks are filled with Iroquois this and Iroquois that. So, these things take time to learn about and understand. And that's why it's a learning journey and it takes time. So, recognize that it takes time.
We've had another question entered in the Jamboard.
Okay. I understand that as a settler teacher, I should not appropriate cultural teachings, but can I teach that some First Nations people belief systems include 7 grandfather teachings and teach what they are?
So I would recommend, because again, it's a belief system, and it's more than a belief system actually, that it should come from the people themselves should be teaching that. Because if it's not from your, if it's not coming from your nation or your people or what you practice and know, then you're not going to be teaching it right anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's better. That's why it's better to bring somebody in to speak to those types of things, like the 7 grandfathers. It's, first of all, you're actually gonna get an accurate. You're gonna learn about it accurately, and also it's depending on where you are. Like the people in my area are different than the people in Tisa's area, so it's how it's different. That's the diversity piece around it. So we want to be careful not to also just broadly say, even in that statement, some First Nations people believe is still very, very broad. So we want to be very careful not to do those broad strokes, but to look for ways that you can share those cultural pieces by the people who carry the rights to also share those.
Mm-hmm. And there are books, beautiful books that have been written by Indigenous authors that, talk about the seven grandfathers. And if we were to go back to my understanding, right, and in my understanding, the teaching that I've received around the seven grandfathers is that those teachings were received in ceremony. And, we don't necessarily want to have to, just talk about the seven grandfathers, which are principles in ways of life to live a good life, without understanding where those teachings came from. So it's about connecting with community. If you are reading one of the books, one of the seven grandfather books, you could extend it in having kids make connections to their own beliefs and values. So that concept of respect, and you read a book, a children's book, and making sure it's from an Indigenous author, that this is, what respect means to this nation. How does respect look in our classroom? How does respect look? And not that you have to go and hang up all the seven grandfather teachings on your bulletin board either. Just because you're getting into kind of murky water, if we might be getting into some tokenism that we're checking off a box, or romanticizing. That's the other piece, right? We're romanticizing. You see some pre-made materials that have like dream catchers or medicine wheels with the feathers, and the seven grandfathers kind of written into the feathers. And if there are Anishinaabe or Indigenous people that choose to use that material, then that is their right. But for non-Indigenous people to use that, it could be quite harmful.
That's why, again, it's best just check with your leads, because it's going to vary. And also being careful too, what about the Ongahongwe students in your class? What about the Inuit students in your class too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, are you representing all, or or Cree students, are you representing, when you choose to focus on, something like seven grandfather teachings, then is that it? Like, what about everybody else? So you just again, it's to be mindful of these, of how we're making sure that all kids are feeling represented, and we don't just focus on one. There's a comment here I think is really important around why some students choose not to stand for O Canada. So in my school board, we put out every year as a reminder, particularly in June, is that remember that Canada has been and continues to be extremely violent towards Indigenous peoples, that the land here was stolen through awful genocide and other really horrendous legislative processes, such as the Indian Act. And so if kids do not want to stand for the anthem, that's their right to not stand for the anthem. That is their right. Or staff, it's their right. And they need to be supported, not shamed, or definitely not disciplined. We have to remember that this is still a very harmful place, that still, like, we are still undergoing genocide. We just look to the foster care system. There are more kids in care than ever went into residential school. I don't want to get into that because we're already over time and I want to answer the questions. But just knowing that, there's so much harm that's continuing to happen. And that's why, going back to what Tisa was saying, look for opportunities for kids to be advocates or activists and speaking out against injustice. That's what we want to try and bring about. Like, highlighting these truths in age appropriate ways, of course, because when we're talking about our little ones, it's going to look different and sound different, but really empowering them to learn about these truths and to speak out against harms that are ongoing.
There's a new one in the Jamboard as well.
Okay.
So, advice for approaching the fact that reservations or First Nations communities across Ontario have different histories. So again, that is, even when I am working with educators, like yourselves, I can only speak from my place and my understanding. So I situate myself appropriately. But then I also, talk about the different lived experiences that I know of, that I've asked questions about, that I've experienced of Indigenous peoples throughout, this land, and just recognizing, honoring the fact that they're so diverse, and our language systems are so unique, and the lived experience in the remote north is actually very very different from road access or urban First Nations. So, it really is about acknowledging that all the time, like situating yourself where you come from, and using the resources that we have, and connecting with your Indigenous education lead in your board, and getting some direction on where you might go. And Karina had mentioned here, there was a comment in the chat box about difficulty getting guests into classrooms, and it is, there's fatigue happening. We have COVID fatigue, but even before COVID, we've talked about at the association about the demand that is put on knowledge keepers and elders to give us the information that we desperately want and need, the teaching, their presence, and it's an unfair expectation because they are getting older, and there are so many of us and not enough of them, and so it is okay to, which is exactly why we created the videos, right? Is explaining that to them, that we want to make sure that there is a safe way to preserve that knowledge and share it out en masse. And no, it is not the same as having a live person in the room with you, but it was really the next best thing, right? It's vetted material. It's supported by the Elders Council on the association, with the association, and we know that it's not going to intentionally cause harm.
Great questions. I've just put the link to the feedback form, so I'd appreciate if you could maybe open that feedback form before you leave. It will be mailed out tomorrow. Actually, I will go ahead and share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Just after I retired, I got involved with a local WordPress organization. So WordPress, many of you probably know, it's sort of the standard website format for blogs, and probably half the internet is running on WordPress. And we hosted a conference here in the Niagara region, and I was one of the facilitators, one of the organizers. And so I asked, are we going to do a land acknowledgement? And they all said, "What's that?" And so I explained it to them, and I said, "I'll take care of it." So right at the beginning of the conference, and I explained that, it's always done at the beginning, and it's not a big fanfare, it's just an acknowledgement. And so I went up to the front, and I think everybody thought that I was going to start the conference very formally and, welcome everyone. And I didn't do that. I just did the land acknowledgement. And then I called up the person that was hosting the conference. And after that, after the opening, a gentleman from around the Rochester area came up to me and he said he was almost crying. And he said he had never seen that before. And he was just so thankful. And it really taught me, you know, like just little things, the acknowledgement and the respect just means so much. And well, like today we had 200 people signed up for this. So I think there's a lot of people out there that realize that the acknowledgement and the respect is so important. And I thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, obviously, to Jodie and Tisa. This was excellent. It's a difficult topic. And as you can see from the questions, right? I think we probably could have stopped the slideshow an hour ago.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And just gone on questions, right?
And just in questions.
Yeah, we were just going on because it was kind of quiet. And then, it's good though. I'm glad. I'm happy that people are asking because that's how it's important to ask. Like that's how the learning happens for sure. Anyway,
tomorrow, I see I have a mistake on that slide, unfortunately. Tomorrow you'll receive an email from Jason at OTF with a link to the evaluation form, although you've got it already, and a link to the slide deck. I'll include that. Shouldn't say Elizabeth, sorry about that. That's the danger of copy and paste. And a link to...
At least it's not a report card, Peter.
Yeah, that's right. I've done that. And a link to where the video is going to be posted as well. So I'll be going through the video tonight. I don't think we didn't mention any student names or anything like that. So there's no privacy concerns that we need to mute or blur out. So yeah, it'll be ready tomorrow, I'm sure. There's the link again, which you have. And then lastly, I just want to put in a plug for both the PD calendar and the OTF YouTube channel. Many teachers don't know about the PD calendar on the OTF website. If you just Google, in fact, OTF PD calendar, you'll find it. So it's a calendar of all the AQs and the ABQs that are running in the province. So, you know, if there's a qualifications course that you want to take, instead of going around to the different unions and the different faculties of education to find what you want to take, just simply come here, and it's a database with all of them in it. And
it's really handy.
Yeah, the goal is to have the courses loaded. I try to get it done at least a month before the courses start. So I actually go around and find out when all the deadlines are, and then, you know, try to have everything done at least a month before the deadline.
How do you know though who's running, like Dufferin Peel, like we run courses, like how would you know?
Well, as soon as I learn about them, I have a master sheet that I keep track of, you know, the page where I can research it.
Oh, okay.
So if your board offers them and they're not listed on here, then shoot me an email with the link, and then I'll add it to my database, and then I'll make sure that they're always entered.
Okay.
Yep. And then the next one is the OTF YouTube channel. So let me pop both links in there now for you. So you can go ahead and just click on them and open them right away for your own records. So I would just encourage you to go there and maybe subscribe. Maybe they'll reach 1,000 subscribers and get monetized.
Hey, yeah,
that's the goal, right?
Let's make
maybe we'll give a prize for a prize for the 1,000.
There you go. What's the prize?
And then lastly, just a reminder, our next webinar is Pathways to Student Success in Social Studies, History and Geography, Exploring Engaging Possibilities.
Oh, that looks like a great one.
It's coming up on, I think Thursday. It says Tuesday.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for coming out. I know everybody's like pretty tired. We're happy that you came and participated and asked all your questions, and we just encourage you, keep doing the good work, keep looking for ways to bring Indigenous voices and perspectives and contributions into the classroom, because, you know, the kids, they just beam when they hear, like we hear this back, my children, Tisa's children over the years, when they, you know, see themselves represented and hear when teachers bring forward, you know, whether it's novels or whatever it is, just keep doing that. It makes a huge difference in a student's life. So thank you, Miigwech, and take care.
Miigwech. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.